Good afternoon, everybody. Want to welcome everybody to the fourth Resiliency and Mitigation Council here in Arizona. My name is Barbara Richardson, and I am the director of the Department of Insurance and Financial Institutions. And I'll be running as chair here for the council itself, and we'll be hearing a couple of different presentations. But before we get to the real work of the committee, the council, I'm gonna have Lori Munn do the roll call.
All right, good afternoon. We're going to go ahead. I'm going to turn it over to Carrie to do attendance, and then we will get to some meeting logistics.
Thank you. Randy Chevalier.
Present.
Chevalier. Laura Curtis. Okay. Carmine DeBonis.
Present.
Terry Edwards.
Present.
Jacob Emnant. Michael Newman.
Present.
Jake Rhodes.
Present.
Tom Savage.
Here.
Tom Torres.
Present.
Barbara Richardson.
Here.
And Laura Curtis.
This is Karen on behalf of Curtis.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. All right, before we get started, I wanted to go over a few meeting logistics. This meeting is being broadcast online and is being recorded. The recording and associated meeting materials will be posted on the council's webpage. Comments in the chat will not be recorded. For council members online, please use your hand raise feature to speak. Except for public comment periods, only council members online will be able to unmute themselves and turn on their camera. If public comments are taken, each speaker's time will be limited to provide everyone who wishes to comment the opportunity to do so. Generally, that's around 2 minutes. And to comment, please fill out a speaking slip, which are by the door if you're in the room, or a Google form if you're online. With that, we are going to move right into our first presentation from Pano AI, Michaela Baker. Thank you for joining us.
Can you hear me all right? Okay, perfect. Yes, well, thank you everyone for having me here today. My name is Michaela Baker, and I am a government affairs manager with Pano AI. First, I wanted to give you a little bit of background on myself. I am a native Arizonan, so I was born and raised in the Prescott area, been there for about 27 years, and was raised on a first-generation cattle and goat ranch up there. And we actually got to use our goats for defensible space around the state about in 2008. So if you guys are here, you might have seen us running around in the Prescott and Wickenburg area, working with a lot of the different fire agencies. So state, Forest Service, a lot of municipalities. And I just had an amazing love for fire after that. I thought that was the coolest job in the world, was to be a wildland firefighter. So after high school, I decided to take the leap, and I became a firefighter for the U.S. Forest Service, and I worked up there on the Prescott National Forest for a little while. And then I was asked to come and teach at our community college, so Yavapai, for the structural side of things. So structure certified firefighter, wildland firefighter, EMT, got it all, ICS information. But after that, I was fortunate to take over as a director of that program for a few years and start to build that and build out the wildfire program there at the college. So decided to take a break from fire. I hadn't fought fire in probably about 9 years. So I decided, okay, let's see what else might be out there for me. And I went to the environmental side. I worked for the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality for a few years and built multiple programs there for them. And that's kind of how I started to learn about Pano AI. I met some folks that had told me a little bit about the company, and it just kind of caught my attention. So I decided to come back to the fire side and see how I could help out in a different arena. So thank you for having me today. Next slide. You're going to have to excuse me. I've never done presentations like the next slide thing, so it might take me a couple seconds. All right. So kind of as I mentioned, I joined PANO because of their mission. So to stop that spread of catastrophic wildfires. And what really caught my attention was the safety piece and portion. You know, I have a lot of friends who are still firefighters across the nation. And that was something that is near and dear to my heart, especially training, you know, firefighters. I always taught them, you know, risk a little to save a little, risk a lot to save a lot, and then risk nothing to save nothing. And so that really hit home that this was their mission to do this safely for our first responders on the ground. So PANO is the first company to actually bring a fully integrated AI-powered wildfire detection system directly to the front lines of that wildfire management. And we're in our 4th year as a company. So we were started in 2020, actually during the pandemic. And we're made up of a variety of folks. So, you know, we understand that there has to be different types of skill sets to make this work for everybody, you know, and especially our people on the ground. So you have folks like myself, and I have a wonderful mentor. Her name is Kat. And, you know, so we have prior or they're still current firefighters that work for us here at PANO. And then we also have folks with extensive technology backgrounds, engineering, and then also machine learning and AI, because Lord knows I cannot do that stuff. So we need folks to help us with that. So yeah, that combination of skills really comes together and allows PANO to build that impactful, helpful tool for the industry. And again, as I mentioned previously, our focus is on equipping emergency responders, utilities, and also any other stakeholders with those tools they need to address those wildfire challenges safely and effectively. Next slide. So I'm not, you know, I haven't been out in the arena for a long time, but much to my knowledge, things really haven't changed when it comes to wildfire response. Usually you'll get that call from dispatch saying, hey, we have a smoke report in this general area. Need you to go take a look at it, right? And for my team, we would get out, you know, I was in a Type 3 engine, and you'd start driving around looking for this thing. And sometimes that would take you about 30 minutes, maybe an hour. It was never really where they said it might be. So, you know, you took an extensive amount of time to get out there and find out where that start was happening. But you did it with limited information usually too. Sometimes, you know, we do get, hey, it's right here. I can see it. This is the wind. This is what's happening. But in very rare cases, right? So you'd get out there and you wouldn't even know what's happening. So then you're doing your scene size up. You're trying to figure out, hey, I need X, Y, Z resources. It's also going to take them about 30 minutes to an hour because we're a very rural state to get out there. So this fire is continuously growing while you're trying to get these folks and assets on the ground to you to help out. And that was just, you know, that's something that we don't necessarily want to do. And especially in Arizona, you know, a lot of my experience, I live up in the Prescott-Chino Valley area, so a lot of our structural departments are also dual departments, so trained in wildland. You're also responding to wildland. So when you get those calls, and sometimes they're not smoke reports, right? Sometimes they're just something like a water dog, you know, in the air, or a cloud that maybe looks like smoke. You're taking those assets out of the city, out in the municipal areas, making those EMS calls, you know, responses even longer because you're trying to go make sure, hey, is this a real smoke report or is it not? So you're just causing, you know, a plethora of time issues, just not knowing what really is going on out there. And also, you know, we're a very rural state. So again, I go back to Prescott because, you know, we have lovely fire issues every year. It never ceases to amaze. We're out there in the forest. And that response time and understanding for emergency managers and also, you know, our law enforcement folks, what's going on, how fast is the fire moving, what's pushing it, do we need to start evacuations? Those things are usually a delayed response, right? Because you're still waiting for firefighters to get on scene, do those scene size ups, try and figure that stuff out. So what PANO is trying to do is be that tool in that toolbox for everybody. So, you know, there's not just one solution, there's a multiple set of tools to use to help that. So just trying to be that tool in the toolbox and improve those first few parts of the initial attack when it comes to wildfires. So we obviously want to detect early, right? We want to know, hey, yes, that is a smoke. We want to do the confirmation on that. So once our systems detect that smoke, it'll actually go to a 24/7 call center that's staffed with real people. We call it the human in the loop. And they're going to make sure, yes, that is a smoke. That is something that we need to, ping and be worried about. Really, it doesn't take that long, maybe a couple of seconds. Once they're pinged, they look at it, confirm it, yes, hit that button. And then we want to disseminate that information quickly so that we can get folks, out there and starting those suppression efforts or fire management, depending on, what your priorities are for that time. All right. And we want to make sure this is all done, obviously, in an easy to use platform. So we don't want to just send something out to you guys and say, hey, here it is on a map, go take a look at it and have fun. So we put this into a very easy to use platform that you can click on a link once, that alert reaches you. It'll open it up and you can actually see Latin longs. You can look at weather and then kind of, topography and those sorts of areas. All right. Next slide. Perfect. And we do this by deploying what we call Pano stations. So we have our cameras, but we deploy them in stations. So each station is equipped with 2 rugged cameras, as you can see on the presentation, and they're roughly the size of a basketball. So those are not to scale, but pretty decent size. And those cameras rotate at 360 degrees, giving you that panoramic view, hence our name Pano. And the reason why we put 2 of these cameras up there is to make sure that we have no blind spots, right? So especially if we have a tower, we don't want there to be a blind spot for possible, smoke detection, just because that camera is going to catch that tower loop. So that's why we put two of them up there. And while the images are being uploaded to the cloud, so, it's taking a real-time video, real-time images, we're overlaying that AI onto those images. And that AI is the one that is trained to say, hey, yep, that's the first signs of smoke that we're seeing. And then alerts our 24/7 systems. So now, again, like I said, while AI is a wonderful tool, we recognize that need for human-backed intelligence in that space. So we have that 24/7 call center that's pinged once that smoke is detected by the cameras. Again, they look at it, confirm, yes, that is smoke, and then they send that out to the resources, trying to help you guys determine, yes, this is something that I need to be aware of and I need to go out and take a look at, or nope, that's just a cloud. You guys are good. Continue on. So that information is then sent out via notification, and it's great. I've been getting notifications on my phone all day. So I'm tied into the entire Pano system. Idaho and California have things popping off all day. So it's been an interesting time, but those notifications will be sent to either a cell phone, points that you need, or determine, hey, there are no roads, so it's going to take us a while to get there. We need to prepare for that as well. And then the information that's uploaded to the platform is also continuously stored. So that information does not go away. So say you do have an arson incident and down the road, your fire marshal is needing to do an investigation. You can go back into that platform, open it up, and grab that information for him as well. Him or her, sorry. All right, next slide. So our cameras have great capabilities. This is a 30x optical zoom. So generally you'll see here within another couple of slides, really what it looks like when our camera is looking at a smoke detect. But the cameras have the ability to zoom in on these fires and give you a closer look at what's really happening. And it also has, as you can see, there's that black and white photo. That is a nighttime image. We take infrared satellite system that's inputted into the camera as well to detect and show you, hey, this is what's going on with the fire at night, so that it's an actual 24/7 visual for folks, which also makes it great for when we do prescribed burning and any management for that, because you can go in, check on it and say, okay, this is what's going on. It's either laying down or things are getting chaotic. We need to get out there and take a look at it, those types of things. Next slide. So this is an image of a prescribed burn that the U.S. Forest Service was doing up in Idaho. So this is the view that you'll see from the camera without the optical zoom. And I think on mine, it might have showed it that smoke was moving. But you can see way off there in the distance, it'll actually pinpoint with a little triangle right where that smoke has been detected. So you can see just how far the cameras can reach. We do about a general 10-mile radius for ease of mind, but these cameras on a clear day can reach up to about like 35 miles out. So they have great capabilities. Next slide. So this is that same fire, that same prescribed fire with that 30x optical zoom, just kind of giving you the difference in comparisons and what you can do with the cameras. And the really great thing about this platform is that I can be looking at this fire, I can be moving through it, I can be, moving how I need to, and it's not affecting somebody else that's looking at the same fire. So you can have multiple folks in there doing what they need at the same time and not interfering with each other. Next slide. Again, just because I like to inundate you with images, this is another night image of a fire that has that 30x optical zoom on it as well. All right. Oh, thank you. So this is one of our case studies that we did. It's the Bear Creek Fire, happened back in June of 2024 in Colorado. One of our Pano stations, you can see that that little triangle that's detecting that smoke there. One of the Pano stations alerted that, hey, there's this smoke. And the thing to note was it was an actually pretty decent red flag day that was going on at that point in time. So that information was sent to our center to make sure, hey, is that real? Confirmed that from our internal call center, yep, that's a smoke report. We need to get that out to them. Sent that out, and that was actually sent to the 911 folks in the dispatch center. And they took a look and they're like, well, yep, opened up that app and started to take a look and see where exactly this thing was. They were able to triangulate with a Latin long where exactly that was, because if you can see up there, there's those two cameras or those two Pano stations. And when you have two stations that cross at some point, they'll give you an exact Latin long of where that smoke is located. So they're able to say, hey, this is going to take us 2 hours to respond, to get our first responders out there. It's a red flag day, and that's not good. So we're going to send up helicopter air attack to make sure we can, drop some buckets on it, try and keep it contained while our firefighters are hiking into the area to dig some line. And it worked great. So as you can see, it started at that quarter acre as soon as they, were pinged and looking at that, and fire was actually able to be suppressed at 3 acres by the end of the same day. So it didn't run, didn't have any issues. It was a great experience for Colorado to have. All right, next slide. And if I sound a little iffy on some of the technical stuff, guys, I just came on a couple of weeks ago, so please give me grace. But along with the great, information and stuff that we're really trying to give to folks on the ground, we understand that you're busy and you don't need to take on the installation or the maintenance or anything with these cameras, right? So what we do here at Pano is we do an end-to-end service. We'll go out and do a site audit and site visit. We'll make sure, hey, is there a power source here? If not, we're going to bring one with us and figure out, how to hook that up. Is there internet or cell service that we can hook into? If not, we're also going to bring that along as well. And then what's the best view shed? So, we'll talk with the customer and say, hey, where are you wanting these to go? And you kind of give us that general idea. We'll overlay some maps on that, and then we'll go out and we'll put up a drone and take a look and make sure where that camera would be sitting, either on that tower, cell tower, whatever it is. That's going to give you a good view of what you're looking at. And then we'll say, yep, this is good, or we'll work with you to try and figure out where the best location for those stations are. We also negotiate all those lease agreements. So if there's a cell tower or power tower, we'll negotiate with those companies ourselves, and we'll get the agreements taken care of and everything, not to worry from anybody, any of the customers on how that's going to go. We'll also, if the land is owned by someone else, do those use agreements as well and take care of that. So like I said, we do the entire installation. So it's our team. We send them out. They go up, they climb those towers. Thank God for them, because I'm not going to do it. They put those up there, and then they'll hook them into the systems. And then if anything goes down maintenance wise, our team, again, they'll, depending on where they're at, they'll hop in, on a plane, fly there, hike in, drive, whatever they need to, and go and fix those cameras and make sure they're up and operational for you. Let's see. We also work with our customers to identify the key players in that view shed as well. So for example, here in Arizona, we work with APS, and we've talked with them quite a bit about, okay, here's where your cameras are. Now let's identify, the folks, 911 folks, our first responders that need access to this system. So no matter if you're technically not the customer, if you're in that area, we will get you access to Pano no matter what. We'll get you signed up, and then we'll also do a free training for you and your team so that you know how this process works moving forward. All right, next slide. So we are a globally recognized and trusted company. I'm not just coming to you with some random thing off the street. We're in 10 US states. So as you can see, a lot of the Southwest, as well as Texas, 5 states in Australia, and then 1 province in Canada. And like I mentioned, a lot of our customers are those utility-based customers, mainly because they are, at the forefront of possible issues if their power lines go down. We've seen some of that, in California and things like that. So they deploy us. And then again, we bring all of our, first responders in and make sure that they have what they need from those. And again, yes, as you can see, we have APS. We're also in contract negotiations right now with Tucson Electric Power for the southern portion of the states, and more to come definitely from APS at least. Next slide. How are we doing on time? Okay. All right, so this is a map of the current and planned Pano station deployments for APS. Now, this is as of December 2024. Some of this might have changed a little bit. I believe they're going to put another 15 stations out, and it's going to try and encompass a little bit more of, I think, like the Buckeye area, those different places. But right now, they're up in the northern portion of the state there in Prescott, Payson, and the Flagstaff area. And then those little, I don't know if you can see it real well, but those little purple squares are where they're going to start putting more of those cameras. Next slide. And then, like I mentioned, we like to get input from everybody, especially our responding agencies. So this is actually a map done in December, again, of 2024. Everything is always subject to change, but we went and talked with DFFM and said, hey, where are your main issues of concern? Let's make sure we're also covering areas for you guys, as well as making sure APS is taken care of. So those red triangles were what were identified at that point in time. Next slide. Thank you. And then this is just another overlaid map, because why not? This layer is from the National Interagency and Fire Center, so kind of showing you where those heavy fire risk areas are in our states. And then again, as you can see, those green stars are where APS currently has those Pano stations. Those purple squares, again, are where, some of their planned stations are. And then those red triangles are where we had discussed with DFFM where they'd like to see some more cameras, taking place. So really taking care of that northern portion of the state. We have those obviously red, really bad, orange, still bad, yellow, still bad, but green is pretty much taken care of. So we have a lot of that northern portion of the state taken care of, and then hopefully here soon with that expansion from APS and Tucson Electric Power, we'll start to see the southern portion of the state taken care of as well. And that is all I have for you today. So thank you for listening and learning a little bit more about Pano. I will give a quick plug while we're on this one, and you can see it. There's that photo down to your lower right. You can see how that's pixelated in that picture. We take privacy very seriously. So if there are any homes in our view shed that the cameras are showing us, you can see windows, you can see driveways. We will do a hard pixelation of that area so that we cannot see what's happening there. We don't care what you're doing in your day-to-day life. We're just looking for smoke. So any questions?
So thank you so much. I really appreciate all that you've provided us here. I do have some questions and they may not be in your
Yeah,
wheelhouse, but if as long as you can get back to us, that would be great.
absolutely.
So how far apart do you usually have these towers and does it matter what the topography is?
Yeah, so generally we have these towers at depending on how many, the customer is getting and what the area looks like. We'll do about a 10-mile again radius because that's where we really like to triangulate the cameras and get those lat and longs. So if you have a multitude that you want to put in one area, we'll do 10 miles, some 10 miles, unless there's something else identified where they need to be further out.
So, and then my next question, I was looking at some of your maps and how the
Yeah.
towers are set up. And it's hard to tell, but do they overlap so they can see the base of each other? So that if there's a fire starting at the base of one of these towers, you would know from the cameras instead of the camera burning.
Yeah. We don't want the cameras to burn. I couldn't tell you 100%, so I can get back to you on that. But if the tower, so if you can see the base of the tower in some of them, yes, you'd know that fire was starting. Generally, I want to say in these tower areas, right, there's like a decent swath around that tower because you don't really want the cell tower or the power tower to burn down. So hopefully we'd catch it before then, but yes.
Okay, so, and then another question has to do with the note you said at the very beginning where the move is to get data from multiple data fields having to do with the smoke with the cameras and satellites, which all makes sense. And then you send it to somebody else to look at the weather reports. Do you guys look at any of the NOAA information that
Yes.
talks about wind? Okay, can you
Yes.
explain how that plays into it?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we do is when all of that information is being compiled, and again, remember, it's super quick. So I don't want you to think like we're sending it to somebody and then they're overlaying a map. It's an instantaneous thing. We overlay the NOAA hourly weather report onto it. So you know what's going on with the wind speeds, what directions they are, what the probability of ignition is that day, RH, all of those things are also inlaid into the app.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question is actually for people on the panel. Do we still use goats here in Arizona? Or-
Not that I know of,
Okay.
but I think you should.
I can answer that. Targeted grazing is an option for reducing wildfire risk and managing vegetation. So it is an option and a tool in the toolbox. So.
Are there any other questions from the panel in the room?
Yeah, I got a question here.
Yeah.
The technology that you're using, is it broadcasting over the cellular network or how is it communicating with your
Yeah.
hardware?
Yeah, absolutely. So it just depends on what's available at that point, right? So if there is cellular capabilities, it will be using the cellular, information. If not, in some especially rugged areas in Montana, we've put up Starlink, and so it'll go across the Starlink to get there. But the great thing about it is it's meant to run on that low frequency level so that even if, cellular service is pretty bad out there, you're still able to open the app and use it in those places. So, yeah.
I had a very similar question about the cellular coverage. That was obviously a concern. If there's a wildfire, we lose internet connectivity, and we saw that in California with some of the reports that were coming out. And so that was a great question. And Starlink seems like maybe a good solution there.
Yeah.
I think I heard appropriately in the local jurisdictions where the fire district or municipality, if the DFFM or APS, which I'm thankful that they're obviously looking at this technology and installing it,
Mhm.
the local jurisdictions would have access to the app and then that would go to the dispatch center to notify us of those same types of incidents. Is that accurate?
Kind of, yes. So yeah, we will onboard whoever, I feel like this isn't, okay. So we'll onboard whoever is in that immediate area. So yeah, if your fire department is in this area that APS has one of those cameras, then yes, we will call you and say, hi, we're from Pano. You know, we identified that you're in the area. We'd like to onboard you. And then our folks will do that. However, it's not just pinging 911 and then 911 tells you, it's disseminating to everybody all at once. So it'll hit 911, it'll hit whoever you identify as wanting to get those notifications, and it'll send it out immediately. So it's not a step-by-step process.
Okay. Thank you.
Just a couple of comments. You referenced DFFM here, and we have great interest in expanding this technology across the state. Right now, APS, I believe, is the primary user of Pano technology or AI technology. Just for the council members' knowledge, the state is going through a solicitation process, and we hope to bring on more cameras within the next few months. I'll just put it that way. And just to let you know too, that we are already using some of the Pano information, that the feeds are going into our state dispatch center. And so our dispatchers have been trained, courtesy of APS, who's been a great partner in sort of spearheading this technology in the state. And so it's already being used, and I see it as a big, exciting, expanded use of technology. And the other thing that is relatively useful for us and useful for fire districts or fire departments is whose jurisdiction is it?
Right.
You know, and so as we are able to better triangulate locations of fire starts, we can have a better sense of who has responsibility and jurisdictional liability for the fire. So that's a big piece of the puzzle for us as well.
Yeah, thank you. And yes, that is something. So it is at no cost to your fire department. We are going to come in and we are going to train you. You know, we won't ask for money or anything like that. So. Right, I know.
One more question. One question.
Yeah.
How many cameras does APS currently have across the state right now?
I want to say at this point in time, they have about 15, and then they're bringing 15 on here soon. So about 30.
Nice.
Any other questions in the room? Any questions online? If you do, please raise your hand, use the raise hand, and Carrie will call on you.
We have one. Sally Crum. Oh, I'm sorry.
If you do have questions, I can leave my information with you folks as well. And if you'd like to email me or give me a call, I'd be more than happy to answer other questions.
We'll have public comments later in the later in the meeting. Only council members, any council members online? All right, hearing none. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right, next up, we have Michael Newman. He's with the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, which is IBHS. Michael, if you want to, yep, please. If you'll just introduce yourself and a little bit about your company. Thank you.
Yeah, so I learned something today. There's something called a peak Newman in Arizona, according to one of your maps. And so I'm pretty stoked that I'm part of the Arizona landscape.
Ask your family about it.
Yeah, right. I'm pretty sure our roots go to Eastern Europe, not Western United States, but you know. So good afternoon. I apologize if I'm a little scattered. I literally just got off an airplane. It's really great to be here with you in person after joining remotely to the prior council meetings. And we heard this great presentation from Michaela about tools that can help fire services respond and forest services respond to wildfires before they become catastrophes. What I'd like to talk to you today about is what IBHS science tells us about what happens when wildfires leave the natural environment and reach into our communities. And the solutions that we know can help drive down that risk at both parcel scale and neighborhood community scale. So thank you for including us on this council and for including me today. A few words. I know that some of you know all about IBHS, but perhaps not all of you do, or those watching at home. So I want to introduce our organization. First of all, I'm Michael Newman. I'm General Counsel of IBHS as well as a member of this council. IBHS, next slide, please. I have to get used to that too. IBHS is a 501c3 nonprofit research and risk communications institute. We're fully funded by our members from the property insurance and reinsurance industry. And from our facility, which you can see on the screen in Richburg, South Carolina, we can recreate the perils of wind, rain, hail, and wildfire, and then conduct full-scale testing of residential and commercial structures. I'm going to show you a video in just a moment of what that actually looks like. But we do our work so we can identify the vulnerabilities to our built environment and then identify the mitigation actions that will close those vulnerabilities. And we're always looking for mitigation actions that are achievable, effective, and affordable. We could build Dr. Evil's lair, but probably nobody could afford it or want to live there. So what we're looking to do is find those things that all of us can do to our homes, either ourselves or by hiring a contractor or a roofer. And it's that type of kind of common sense, grounded in science mitigation actions that we're after, because we believe that those types of science-based solutions can help us to narrow the path of damage from wildfires and other natural perils. So now the video I promised. We're really all about driving changed behavior through more informed homeowners, business owners, consumers, and communities. It's change that is unfortunately most evident after disasters, whether that's a wildfire or a hurricane or a tornado, when some homes are damaged and others are not, like this fortified roof after Hurricane Sally that stood out like a beacon on its cul-de-sac. Fundamentally, we want homes to still be standing and communities to still be thriving after the threat passes. Our work is informed by research in the field, observing fundamental hazard characteristics, and studying post-disaster damage. Our research center enables us to do what nobody else can. We can recreate severe weather. We can turn the knobs on Mother Nature. We've got a 6-story airplane hangar with 105 turbines that can recreate Cat 3 hurricane winds. We don't do research in our test chamber that's downscaled. Everything is full scale. And the work that we do on wind shows us how both residential and commercial structures can perform as a system, need to perform as a system, and the actions that we need in communities to narrow paths of damage. We simulate wind-driven rain that amplifies losses, not a major issue in Arizona, of course. And our innovative thinking in hail research and testing is reshaping understandings and driving change in the market. And it's our ability to recreate wildfire ember storms and conduct full-scale wildfire research that gives us unparalleled insights into home ignitions and how to stop them. And that drives our wildfire prepared program I'm going to talk to you about later today. We do all of this to live out our mission to prevent avoidable suffering, strengthen our homes and businesses, inform the insurance industry, and support thriving communities across the country. Now, I talked to you just now about 4 different perils that we study, but today, next slide, please, is all about wildfire. And specifically the conflagrations that can play out when wildfires reach into our communities. We saw this play out to devastating effect in January in Los Angeles. As the world watched Palisades and Altadena burn, we were given a graphic and painful reminder of what happens when Mother Nature barges in through the front door with a blowtorch in her hand. Now, California has some of the best wildfire codes in the country, but the homes in the Pacific Palisades and Altadena were built before those codes went into effect. So when the flames came, they were reduced to ash. Next slide, please. Now, we all know wildfire is a natural phenomena. It's been happening since the time of the dinosaurs or before the time of the dinosaurs. But what we have that the dinosaurs didn't is houses, and communities and neighborhoods. And it's when wildfires come into our built environment, when they leave the natural environment and come into the built environment, those homes and buildings where we live and work, that we can have a conflagration. Now, we define conflagration as wildfire that spreads into the built environment, which leads to an uncontrollable structure to structure fire spread. And I want to harp on that word uncontrollable just for a moment. Our fire services are incredible and brave and effective. And sometimes, like in Lahaina, like in the Marshall Fire, like in Los Angeles, those forces get overwhelmed by this uncontrollable building to building fire spread. When fire services, their first and most important duty is to evacuate people and take care of that light safety and not to protect buildings. So slowing the spread and limiting the damage of conflagrations requires pre-fire committed risk reduction at both the property and the neighborhood scale. Today, I'm going to cover both. Next slide, please. But first, though, let's talk about where to expect conflagrations. We know that they follow people, drought, and wind. And unfortunately, here in Arizona, those three vectors do come together. Next slide, please. So first, people. We have across the Western United States a booming population. Right? Communities are becoming more densely populated. This means more people, it means more structures, and it often means structures that are built more closely together in areas that are at risk for wildfire. And Arizona is not immune to these trends. If you look on this chart, you can see it's certainly not California, but it's about fourth on the list of Western states in terms of population boom since 1910. Next slide, please. Next is drought. You've got this in spades, whether you're looking at it in terms of long-term drought or short-term drought. Nearly half the state is experiencing extreme drought conditions right now, and these have actually worsened in recent months. Next slide. Finally, let's talk about wind. Locations across the state experience windy conditions, typically in May and June, early on in the monsoon season before the higher humidity and precipitation come into play. That can lead to thunderstorms that don't bring rain, but do bring lightning strikes. And with gusty winds and lightning strikes, you can have fire sparked and then spread. So unfortunately, with the people, with the drought, and with the wind, here in Arizona, we have those conditions for conflagrations. The risk is present, and I think everyone sitting at this table knows that. The good news is, though, that for more than 15 years, wildfire researchers, including scientists at IBHS, have been conducting post-disaster investigations and boundary-pushing experimentation at labs to better understand wildfire risk and how to mitigate it. And while the science is not as advanced as it is compared to, say, how we understand hurricanes and how to mitigate against them, the science is very much catching up. I hope that's one of the takeaways that you have after this presentation. So next slide, please. Sorry, I keep saying, keep forgetting to say next slide. So keep going. This is that science is catching up. And next slide. Thank you. So this is a video showing research at our facility in South Carolina. We have an ability through ember generation machines to study the interaction of wind and embers in the built environment. And what this has helped us to understand is what mitigation actions can actually slow or stop home ignitions from embers. You see here two side-by-side structures subjected to the very same conditions, the same wind, the same embers. And yet the structure on the left is aflame and the one on the right is not. And the reason for that is the structure on the right has undertaken that system of mitigation actions to prevent ignition from embers. We also conduct research outside on a concrete pad behind our research center. I think Commissioner Richardson, you've been there and seen some of this work where we're doing structure to structure fire experimentation to better understand those community dynamics of how fire travels from one parcel to another. Next slide, please. So I mentioned before that wildfire risk mitigation really requires actions at both the parcel level and the neighborhood level. So let's start with the parcel level. Next slide, please. Wildfires have three ignition mechanisms: embers, flames, and radiant heat. And when wildfires enter into a community, all three of these things are in play. The flames make the news, but we know that embers travel for miles ahead of the line of the wildfire sometimes, depending on the wind conditions. So we have to keep a really close eye on those embers because they can ignite spot fires or even ignite the structures themselves. These ignitions lead to more embers. They also lead to flames, and they also lead to radiant heat. All three of those can then ignite fires in a community. When there's high wind conditions or gusty wind conditions, they can fan the flames and send those embers on even further, reaching like fingers further into neighborhoods. We have seen this time and time again in wildfires. Next slide, please. So when you put all of these factors together, you can get devastation, as in this community in following the Marshall Fire in Colorado. Now, Dr. Jack Cohen, who many of you know, I'm sure, a retired U.S. Forest Service scientist, says, and I quote, "Community wildfire risk should be defined as a home ignition problem, not a wildfire control problem." That is to say, with all the great tools at Pano AI and all the great work that's done by our Forest Service and by our fire services, we can't just suppress or control our way out of this wildfire crisis. The only way we can solve this great challenge is to try to control home ignitions by making our communities safer and more survivable when it comes to wildfires. So the science in the field in this lab has led us to a set of critical mitigation actions that can reduce ignition from embers. You see them up in front of you. They concern the roof, having a Class A fire rated roof, certain building features, including ember resistant, flame resistant vents. So embers can't get into homes and start a fire in the attic or in the crawl space. And then defensible space. This is really, really critical, having the right set of defensible space, particularly in the 5-foot area around structures. It's in California, they call it zone 0. Elsewhere, it's called the home ignition zone. And it is, if I have to pick my favorites among my children, all of these mitigation actions matter. Zone 0 is probably the most important. While they all must be done, zone 0 is absolutely critical. Next slide, please. You can see in this photograph why. If you look at those embers in this time-lapse camera, they kind of bounce off the structure in a bit of a vortex and collect in that 5-foot area around the structure. If there's anything burnable or combustible in that area, these embers can ignite it. And then it's the flames, the heat from that ignition that can transfer it to the house. Could you advance the slide, please? This video really tells the story. This is a demonstration we did behind the research center at IBHS. And the structure on the right has that perfect, pristine, non-combustible zone 0. On the left, there is a wooden fence leading directly to the structure. There's vegetation, there's wood mulch that can burn. And while the structure on the right is maintaining its safety, you see the flames, all that material, all that combustible material have led the flames to the structure like a wick on a candle. Fundamentally, this can be the difference between a family that's able to return home after an evacuation and have a house that's left that they can call their home, and a family that comes back after evacuation to simply sift through the ashes for anything that might have survived. That's how important having non-combustible defensible space in that 0 to 5 area is. Next slide, please. So next, let's turn to the neighborhood level actions. Now we have, next slide, please. We have been studying these community dynamics of wildfire risk through modeling, through field observations following wildfires. We were on the ground in Los Angeles in January. We were on the ground in Hawaii after the Lahaina fire. We were on the ground in Colorado after the Marshall fire. I really hope there's no reason for us to be on the ground here in Arizona. And we also do the experimental testing that I mentioned earlier at our research facility. Next slide, please. And what we've learned through this is while every wildfire is a little bit different, there's a repeatable pattern of how these wildfires impact communities. Lofted small embers, and it looks like the video is stuck. It can go 2 to 3 miles on the wind. Once they land in communities, the radiant heat and the flames can take over in contributing to the structure to structure fire spread. If we just advance to the next slide. And what we've learned from our, we seem to be stuck. So we have, what this slide, what this video is showing is that there are just different areas of impact. It can be miles for embers. It can be hundreds of yards for heat, for flames, and then closer for heat. Anyway, what we've learned is that conflagrations are driven by a few key factors. Structure spacing, connective fuels, and building materials. Structure spacing, next slide please, refers to how closely, densely populated is a neighborhood. How close are the houses to each other? You can see here the house that is boxed in yellow is a surviving structure from the line of fire. And if you click once more, I think, there we go. And you can see right across, it's set back. There's area of lawn in the front that keeps it further away from the house on across the street that burned. In contrast, the house right next door was closer up to the street. It had less structure spacing, and so its exposure to the flames from across the street were higher, which ultimately led for it to ignite and burn. If we can use setbacks and zoning to maximize the separation between structures, we can really make a difference in one of the key factors of conflagrations. Next slide, please. And once more. The next factor is connective fuels. Click it again, please. And connective fuels are just those natural pathways of fuel that fire sees. Fires don't see houses and cars and fences and vegetation. They see fuel. It's binary. Is it fuel or is it not fuel? And so what we really need to do is stop that chain of connective fuel that lead the fire from parcel to parcel to parcel to parcel. Next slide, please. So at 10 feet, this is what the fire sees. 10 feet separation between the homes, there's vegetation, there might be a car parked in between, there might be privacy fences. It just sees one line of connected fuels that it can burn. If you click it once more, if we can extend that structure separation to 20 feet, if we can have the defensible space that removes the connective fuels, then we're getting somewhere. Then the building materials, if they're the right ones, can have a chance. So go to the next slide, please. And that's really the last factor that we see as making an impact on conflagration. Having ignition-resistant building materials are not fireproof, but those materials can give homes a fighting chance, particularly if we've taken care of that structure separation and the connective fuels that don't bring the flames too close to the structure. Think of it as a thumb on the scale and the balance against the strength of wildfire. Next slide, please. So next, I want to turn to how we translate this science into actions and solutions for homeowners and communities. Next slide, please. The chief way at the parcel level is our wildfire prepared program. It is, we have taken that science, taken those key mitigation actions I mentioned earlier, and turn them into a technical standard that goes beyond what building codes or WUI codes might require and reduces the risk of home ignition. Wildfire prepared home is our base layer. You see those mitigation actions now. They must all be undertaken collectively, and they reduce the risk of ignition from embers. If you click on the slide again, please, you'll see an additional set of mitigation actions that can reduce the risk of home ignition from radiant heat. While both are available on a retrofit basis or a new construction basis, what we're seeing is that wildfire prepared home is eminently possible, achievable on a retrofit basis, it's more expensive to replace building materials, siding and windows and doors and such. So it might be that new construction is the best place to employ Wildfire Prepared Home Plus. Although I don't want to give you the impression it's impossible, it's just harder and more expensive to retrofit to the plus level. Homeowners on our website at wildfireprepare.org, homeowners are provided with a checklist of all the things that they'll need to do to enter into this program. Once they apply, and they will have to show some initial pictures that they meet the defensible space requirements, because we found that's where people fall short the most. Once they go through that eligibility check, we'll send an inspector out. That inspector will gather documentation and evidence that they have met or not all of the mitigation actions. And after it's reviewed on the back end by us as a quality assurance, we issue the designation. We're beginning to see how this is playing out in the insurance space and markets where the program is available. Right now, that's that's California and Oregon. With some homeowners have been able to keep their insurance. They've been able to avoid that non-renewal letter by having a wildfire prepared home designation. And others have been able to see at least a small discount. We're asked often, well, what does it take to bring wildfire prepared into a new state? We're essentially looking for one of three demand signals. The first is if an IBHS member, and most of the largest insurance companies in the country are our members. So if an IBHS member informs us or informs a state's department that they're going to be incorporating wildfire prepared into their business operations, maybe that's pricing, maybe or rate filing, maybe that's underwriting, whatever the case may be, we will come to that state to support our member. Second, if the state makes a commitment to wildfire prepared through some type of public program, let's say there's a grant program that incorporates wildfire prepared as the basis for giving out homeowner mitigation grants. There's a bill right now in New Mexico that's playing out that would probably do that. And if that passes, we would come to New Mexico in support of that. And then finally is we do a lot of work with builders. So if a national or a regional builder that is doing significant new construction in a state makes a commitment to build to wildfire prepared, we will come to the state to support that as well. Essentially, for us to make that operational expansion, we need to have one of those three demand signals, but we absolutely want to and expect to be in most or all of the Western states as things warrant. Next slide, please. So that's the parcel level, but we also recognize that there need to be solutions at the neighborhood or community level. Because we need whole communities to mitigate, whole neighborhoods to mitigate, excuse me, because we need them to do that so we can break that chain of conflagration I was talking about before. So to help drive the change, we're developing a wildfire prepared neighborhood standard. The goals of the standard are to develop an adaptive system and process that would provide a system of mitigation actions for a neighborhood. And I say adaptive because no two neighborhoods are exactly the same. They have different contexts. They have different fuel sources within and without. So we're developing a standard that will apply differently to different types of neighborhoods. And I'll get into that in just a moment. We also want to provide a benchmark for understanding a neighborhood's risk from conflagration. We're in the process of developing this. There is a beta version that's being shared with stakeholders. We're going to be running a few pilots later this year to see how it would match up against actual communities in California and elsewhere. And then we'll be looking to operationalize this standard in program in the future. Next slide, please. There are four core principles of this standard. As you can imagine, it's decreasing the probability of initial ignitions, be that from embers or direct flames. It's slowing fire spread within a neighborhood if and when ignitions do occur. If we can slow it down, then the fire services can do their jobs and put the wet stuff on the hot stuff, and we don't have a conflagration. Fundamentally, and this is so key, we want to allow the neighborhood to act as a fuel break, not a fuel source. I was in Lahaina about a year ago, I was in Honolulu meeting with state leaders and in Maui meeting with county leaders about the recovery. and sharing our findings from the investigation we did after the wildfire. And we showed, we did a whole presentation, we showed a video of our findings, and we focus always in our post-disaster investigations on which homes and clusters of homes survive. Now, it's pretty obvious what happens when things burn. We want to know why things survive. So after we gave the presentation, one gentleman from county government raised his hand and he said, one of the houses that you all showed, that was my dad's house. It was the house I grew up in. He was a firefighter and he was rigorous about keeping our homes safe. He understood the risk and he took all the actions that you talk about of his own accord because he just knew. The thing is, though, it wasn't just his house that survived. It was 5 houses behind it because his home and his property acted as a fire break, where so much else of Lahaina was a fuel source from home to home to home, building to building. This one retired firefighter's house protected his neighbors. That's what we're after. That's what we need to get to. Next slide, please. So the system, as I mentioned before, is going to be adaptive. We're going to look at surrounding fuels, both natural and man-made, and divide neighborhoods into 2 areas, ember-resistant zones and flame-resistant zones. And there will be different mitigation actions required in each of those 2 zones. There are going to be some and next slide, please. There'll be some things that will be completely a matter of eligibility. There will need to be 100% Class A roofs. We'll have to get rid of all connective fuels. But there will be other mitigation actions that do vary based on the factors of the specific neighborhood. Next slide, please. As this is a wildfire conversation with a deep impact on the insurance industry and the insurance market, I want to, in closing, just say a few words about the intersection of this type of science-based risk reduction with the insurance markets for states like Arizona. Now, we've seen a generationally hard insurance market in many states all over the country, and it's posing challenges for consumers, both regarding both the price of insurance and in some cases even the availability of insurance in the admitted markets. The hard driver has many the hard market has many drivers, right? We have inflation, there's rising construction costs, there's rising property values, there's increasing litigation costs, and yes, there is rising risk, wildfire risk in this area of the country. Our wildfire prepared program is primarily about reducing risk to strengthen the survivability of homes. We want them to survive the wildfire so families can get back in them after an evacuation, can get on with their lives. But the program is also meaningful for insurability as well, because it's pairing risk reduction with an inspection process. So we have science-based mitigation actions that are being verified and understood and trusted by the insurance industry. As the program comes to and grows in Arizona, I hope it can continue to play this dual role of supporting both survivability and insurability of the homes and the communities here in this state, helping homeowners, helping communities, and ultimately supporting the health of the Arizona insurance market as well. Now, I know that, next slide, please. I know that this council will not be making recommendations in its report at the end of the year, but since I have the mic, I just want to share some of what I'm seeing in states across the American West when it comes to public policy in reducing wildfire risk. One is WUI codes. Statewide WUI codes, I understand, can be challenging, particularly the mapping process, the deciding what's in the WUI and what's not in the WUI, but it is incredibly important to have a firm baseline of construction standards when it comes to wildfire risk. Relatedly, defensible space requirements. I can't underscore enough how important it is to have statewide defensible space requirements, particularly in that 0 to 5 zone around the house. This is such an important thing that can be done to both new construction and existing construction. It's not like a building code where it's just really impacting new construction. Defensible space applies to all the homes in a community. And if we can elevate the baseline so that all homes are doing the right things when it comes particularly to that 5-foot area around homes, we're going to do an awful lot of good to reduce wildfire risk and reduce conflagration risk. Let's talk a moment about resilient retrofits. Right? Even if we have a really good building code, a really strong WUI code, like if I could wave my wand and make that happen, we would still have the existing housing infrastructure of all the homes that are already built. So we need to have help for homeowners to do those necessary retrofits to get them at least to that level of wildfire prepared home that protects against embers. Financial nudges can help. There are catastrophe savings accounts that are kind of tax incentives to help people save to do this type of work. There are tax credits for doing this type of work. There are grant programs that are being established or at least being considered in states like New Mexico and Idaho and California. Now, when we're thinking about retrofits and grant programs in particular, it's really, really important to remember that my friend Laura McCarthy, who's the state forester in New Mexico, I heard her say something the other day and I told her I was going to steal it. She said, we have to stop having random acts of retrofits. When it comes, random acts of kindness are good. Random acts of retrofits are not helpful. We need to find ways to cluster retrofits so we're getting both those property level risk reduction benefits and neighborhood community scale. Wildfire is a strange hazard in that it's the only peril that we study at IBHS and possibly the only peril period where you can do everything right, but if your neighbors haven't, you're still at risk. We truly are all of our neighbors' keepers when it comes to reducing wildfire risk. So having public programs that are looking at neighborhoods holistically can be helpful. To that end, there is a bill that passed last year in Colorado and is being considered in New Mexico this year that prevents HOAs from stopping its residents from engaging in wildfire mitigation activity. If you can believe it, there are HOAs out there that say you have to keep that wooden privacy fence and you have to connect it to your home with a wooden gate because we like the look. Well, that look, as you saw in the video earlier, can lead to conflagration. So that's really right-headed, sensible legislation that can just frankly stop stupid. And it usually has strong support in the states where it's been introduced. So I realize we're not going to be recommending any of those things in this report, but I did want to share them with you while we're talking today. Next slide, please. With that, I am happy to take any questions from the council. Thank you for your time and attention.
Hi, when you mentioned retrofits are expensive, do you know about what the costs are?
It depends on the retrofit and it depends on the state of the house. We estimate that to get to wildfire prepared homes, so we're talking about the retrofits that are going to help protect against embers. It's not very expensive. I mean, I don't mean to say, let me take a step back again. Sorry, plain brain. It's about $5,000 to $7,000 probably to do that work. We're talking, and it's going to depend on how large the house is, how much de-landscaping needs to be done. But things like putting flame and ember resistant vents into crawl space and attic space areas, openings are a do-it-yourself job with things that can be purchased at the Home Depot. So it is going to be a range, but it is very, well, $5,000 to $7,000 might be too expensive for many. It is relatively affordable. It's when you get into replacing windows and doors and siding where the price tag can go up considerably. Headwaters Economics has a resource, a report they put out last year, I believe, that puts prices against, at least in the California market, I think, different retrofit actions that can be helpful. But it's going to depend market to market. But I do believe that retrofits to that wildfire prepared home level where we're protecting against embers, while they're not free, and $5,000 to $7,000 can be too much for some families, it is achievable. And there are public programs that can be stood up to help cover the gap for anyone who can't come up with those funds on their own.
Any other questions in the room?
So talking about connected fuels,
Mhm.
that's interesting to me because of developers, contractors. You see a lot of subdivisions that it's all about space,
Mhm.
or the lack thereof.
Yep.
How receptive are the builders and developers to these topics? And we talk about the retrofit costs. What about the upfront cost? When you go back to required sprinklers and that really affected the home costs at the end because it got passed on.
Mhm.
How about these costs on the front side and the builders and developers?
Yeah, so I always am careful about talking about any industry as a group. Pretty sure the insurance industry doesn't like it when people do that, and I try not to do it either. Um, we work with a number of builders and they've frankly been very receptive because across the West, if you build a house that nobody can buy because they can't get insurance on it or they can't afford the insurance on it, that's not good business. And so if there is a way to lean in and build houses with greater wildfire survivability and insurability, I believe that builders want to do that because it's good business. It is the right thing to do, but it's also good business. In terms of costs, my understanding is a lot of it is about choices in building materials that on the front end are not going to be as costly as they would be on a retrofit basis because you're not replacing a perfectly good window that just isn't resilient enough for wildfire with a dual pane tempered glass window. There's always going to be some additional costs. I don't know off the top of my head the level. But again, it's I think very clear-eyed analysis of the business landscape is a place where we all need to come together around wildfire risk, and that's builders and its insurers and its contractors and its realtors. And I think there's firm agreement that if we can reduce the risk, we can make things go a lot more smoothly for all those industries.
Thank you for the presentation. I've been following IBSH for some time now and I've learned a lot more about it today. I'm always impressed when I get to listen and learn more about the way we can survive a wildfire impact in our communities. I think as a firefighter, we think about breaking up the continuity of fuels, fire breaks, so forth, and that's exactly what we're talking about. My question is, who does inspections? Is that a local jurisdiction problem or is that an IBSH insurance problem?
I mean, it's an opportunity, not a problem,
Opportunity,
of
it's probably
course.
a better way to phrase it.
So for our program, at least, I mean, the question, who does inspections generally, that could be anybody. There are, lots of communities in many states that have home assessment programs that are done through their fire services or done through community groups, and they have their own inspection process and the like. For our wildfire prepared program, we are a homeowner contracts directly with us, with IBHS, and then we contract out to inspection companies to provide the inspection services for that homeowner. So it's not an IBHS employee. We have less than 100 people on staff, so we can't be everywhere. So we contract that out, and they collect the documentation and then send it back to us, and then we're doing the back end quality assurance pieces. So does that answer your question?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
it does. Thank you.
Yeah, Michael, thank you for the presentation. Learned a lot too, just like Chief Chevalier. So I'm really interested in this wildfire prepared standard. And how does that complement or replace existing WUI codes, the FireWise program, which we all know is a voluntary program? It's not, you can't guarantee compliance with the FireWise standard.
Okay.
There are some similarities, but there are some differences as well. So how would this wildfire prepared standard be used by who? How does it complement existing things out there?
That's a really rich set of questions to unpack. So let's start with FireWise. I know that we had NFPA here earlier in the year, or maybe at the end of last year, to present on FireWise. And it's a great program. We work very closely with NFPA. And as you said, FireWise is about getting participation. It's about getting engagement at that community level. It's not necessarily outcomes focused. What we're focused on at IBHS is the outcome of risk reduction. And so who can play in our space, I would say a Firewise community should absolutely be using wildfire prepared home as the outcome that they are trying to collectively achieve in their neighborhood. When there's a wildfire prepared neighborhood standard or program that's available down the line, that too can be part of that. So I think there's absolutely an opportunity, and it's understood by both IBHS and NFPA, that our programs are mutually supportive and can be integrated, not in any way in competition with each other. The wildfire prepared, let me distinguish between the standard and the program. So I think the standard is very complementary to existing WUI codes and defensible space requirements. You all know the wildfire science space is very small. Everybody knows each other. And so we participate in the ICC process. We participate in all sorts of, our scientists and our fire scientists and our codes people are engaged in conversations with everyone developing those pieces all the time. So there is, I'll give you a for example in terms of Chapter 7A in California. Chapter 7A in California and Wildfire Prepared are almost fully aligned, where they may give a few more choices. We're a little bit more prescriptive in terms of what must be done. So if they give 3 choices on a particular mitigation action, we might just say you have to do X. So that's the standard, and that standard can be utilized by anyone, even without the program coming to Arizona. If you all wanted to, in your work, start teaching and educating around the wildfire prepared standard, it is freely available, and we would work with you to help you do that. The wildfire prepared program is where it becomes available in a state for a homeowner to apply. There's an online portal. They pay $125, I think it is right now. And they go through the process of, submitting the pictures to have that eligibility of their defensible space, of undergoing the inspection by our contractors who do the inspection pieces. And then once they go through the QA on the back end by us, they get their designation. And they can, that designation should make them feel good that their home is safer, it's more survivable, but also they can share it with their insurance agent. And, any different companies, everyone has their own way of doing business, and some may consider it one way, some might consider it another way, but it is a symbol that they have reduced their wildfire risk at the parcel level. In that way, our programs, both Wildfire Prepared and Fortified, which is our program in the wind space, that's generally more east of the Rockies type program, it's a bridge between what is done by the property owner and what's understood by the insurance industry.
I think we had a question online, Carmine, from the council.
Hi, all. Good. Turn echo up. You're hearing an echo. There's just some activity. All right, I'm going to do the echo up. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate what you outlined. So question that I have is if you're looking at a parcel basis and a neighborhood basis, how would you approach jurisdictions, right? A jurisdictional wide approach to standard development or standard implementation. So, if we're facing having to pick the right mix of things to do as a jurisdiction here in Pima County, what's the right balance between wildland urban interface code, Firewise, the fire prepared standards, the fire prepared neighborhood standards? How do we position ourselves jurisdictionally to apply the right mix of standards, whether it's building or defensible space or approach to assisting residents in retrofit? Because, I was in a setting with the Southern Arizona home builders, and it was a land forecast, and they're really trying to figure out how to provide homes that are more affordable to residents. And so, they're doing lots that are 45-foot, street frontage or 40, and some of them are even experimenting with 35-foot street frontage. And when you talk about separation, it seems like some of these things are working cross purpose. So my real question is, right, what guidance is there, or how would you recommend the jurisdiction's approach putting together the right package of standards to help address this issue of fire risk?
Great question, complicated question, and you're not alone in facing it. Let me take it in parts. We have tension between our housing crisis and our wildfire crisis, right? Our housing crisis dictates we need to build more densely. Our wildfire crisis dictates that we need to build more safely. How do we do that? There need to be trade-offs. And I can't sit here today and tell you what the solution is to that, other than to say we need to acknowledge that there are things that are in tension. We can't have densely populated neighborhoods of single-family homes with 3-foot setbacks, so 6 feet away from each other with a wooden privacy fence in between, and have wildfire risk reduction that makes those same homes insurable at hopefully affordable prices. Those things are fundamentally in tension. Now, are there ways we can try to build more densely, like in more of an urban context, that might reduce some of those wildfire risk pieces? Maybe. Are there things we could do with setbacks and putting, I talked about maximizing structural separation. If the street frontage is going to be relatively small, is there possibility to have deeper lots? So, and then you're kind of stacking houses. Some are up against the street and some are back behind, so they're at least not right next to each other. I'm throwing out some brainstorming type ideas, but just to say, we need to think these things through and apply the science to develop as safely as we can, making the best use of the science as we can, understanding we have a housing crisis and affordability and housing crisis as well. I think for too long in this country, though, we've said, well, we need more housing and we need more affordable housing, so let's just not worry about the safety in terms of the risk of wildfires and other natural hazards. And we need to take those into account as well. So on to your other set of questions, which had to do with how do you sift between all of these different standards and programs and the like. I think that WUI codes that are coming out of IWUI are very good. We've converted our wildfire prepared home standard into a model ordinance that local jurisdictions can take advantage of. But having some kind of modern and enforced WUI code and defensible space requirements is really important. And as a local jurisdiction, one of the most important things you can do in this space is have those building blocks in place. Beyond that, Firewise is as we talked about before, a really terrific way of bringing communities together to act collectively to try to reduce their risk as a neighborhood. I don't necessarily know what the point of intersection would be there with the jurisdiction itself. But the good people at NFPA, I'm sure, have good answers for that. They could answer any questions you have. And then it's a matter of, once you have those building blocks, the fundamental building blocks of the dreaded R word, right? Regulation. I like to think, by the way, that building codes and the like, it's not to tell you what to do, it's to make sure that your neighbor is doing the right thing. I want to assume that the person I'm talking to is going to do the right thing, but we want their neighbor to do the right thing as well. Then it's about, how do we help people get over the hump? Are there incentives that we can put in place to encourage those homeowners that already live in homes that weren't built necessarily to these standards to retrofit? Because we need to tackle that challenge as well. Carmine, I hope I at least somewhat answered or at least validated some of your questions, and happy to talk to you offline too in a deeper way on this stuff.
Thank you. Any other?
And I think this was getting to the point that the previous speaker was making, and we're kind of in the middle of a debate right now in terms of land use planning. And so when you talk about that, it's something we're concerned about, the limitations on, the setbacks, the lot sizes, we think all plays a role in building and life safety. And especially in states like Arizona, where we're running out of, we've got a lot of federal land, we've got a lot of state land. A lot of greenfield development is occurring in wild and urban interface areas. So, we want to be thoughtful about land use practices to make sure that, there is defensible space between structures. We're not putting high density developments in areas that might be difficult if it's right next to a high fire risk and you've got to do evacuations. Doing that in a high density area is going to be problematic. I know you talked a little bit about, some of the research that IBHS is doing. I don't know if there's best practices that you can point to say, okay, well, if you're going to do a higher density, single family detached residential development in a wild and urban interface area, you should think about having setbacks, at this standard, or, here's some other best practices that you should implement into your zoning code. I don't know if that's something that you're all taking a look at, but we're under a tremendous amount of pressure from developers because they're citing the affordable housing situation, and they're suggesting reduce lot sizes, reduce setbacks. All will help to reduce some of those costs and turn around an affordable product. But from the land use perspective, we got to make sure that that's a safe area to be able to do that. So the other thing, accessory structures, accessory dwelling units, that's another topic that we're starting to see. We had legislation pass just this last session that allows for property owners to be able to install accessory dwelling units. Same question, is there best practices in terms of how you implement these policies safely in wild and urban interface areas while also reducing wildfire or structure to structure fires?
Yeah, we have not put out any best practices on land use issues. I don't have it with me in this particular presentation, but I can share some information with the council later that lays out some of our work doing experimental structure to structure fire spread. We did shed burns, and now we're doing actually ADU burns. And the data suggests that when structures are less than 10 feet apart, the likelihood of damage is incredibly high. If we can extend out that structure separation to 20 feet, then we have a much, or even more, but I know that's not realistic. In the context you're describing, we can do some things with having the right type of defensible space and the right building materials and the like. But these developments that are, 3-foot setbacks, 6 feet, houses 6 feet from each other, it's real tough to know what to do about that. On the ADU front, we do consider ADUs and other accessory dwellings in the wildfire prepared standard. And what I would recommend is that if ADUs are going to be built, they be built to the very same wildfire standards as the primary structure. So the same type of material choices, the same type of defensible space pieces to reduce the risk. And I think we allow, I'd have to go back and double check, but I believe that in our wildfire prepared home, that ember ignition level, you can have, as long the accessory structure would have to be at least 5 feet away and to our standards. For wildfire prepared home plus, which has that higher degree of protection against radiant heat, accessory structures would need to be 30 feet away. And that's because of that danger that they can pose.
You talked about working with some of the national builders on, I guess, certifying their construction for, I forget the term you use, like wildfire prepared standard. What does that look like? And if I'm if I'm a home builder, how do I get certified
Yeah,
with this?
so I can't get into any specifics, but I could say any builders who are listening or who you are working with that are interested in learning more about wildfire prepared, their wildfire prepared program, please give them my contact information. I can get them to the right person within IBHS. And we work with them, explain, what it is that our program is, as they are developing, blueprints and community prints. We can work with them to help identify ways that they can meet our standards. Because I think that's voluntary take up of this type of enhanced resilience, enhanced survivability and insurability is a really important part of the puzzle. And builders have a really, really critical role because they're the ones who are constructing our new communities. So we welcome engagement with them. We welcome the opportunity to work with them and to help them understand what are the actions that they can take that will A, reduce the risk, and B, be recognized by the insurance industry.
Michael, one last question. One of the things this council is trying to do is learn what other people are doing. I think I heard you make reference to Colorado and perhaps New Mexico.
Mhm.
Can you comment on what they're doing and how does it incorporate some of the stuff you're talking about?
Sure. First, let me say Arizona is, of course, my favorite Western state.
Of course.
But we do work with states all across the country on these types of issues. So some examples I have seen, some have been enacted into law, some are in flow, some are further in flow than others. Colorado prohibits homeowners associations from stopping homeowners within the association from doing wildfire mitigation consistent with nationally recognized standards. So if you want to, as you should, replace the wooden gate connecting your privacy fence to your property with a non-combustible fence, they can't with a non-combustible gate, they can't prohibit that. Whereas previously they could and sometimes did. New Mexico is trying to enact legislation that would do the same thing. It's essentially the same bill. In New Mexico, there is I think it's called the Wildfire Preparedness Act, maybe. It's Senate Bill 33, and it would create a $20 million grant program to help retrofit homes within neighborhoods to a nationally recognized wildfire standard. I imagine that wildfire prepared home will be very much in the mix on that nationally recognized standard. California, Commissioner Lara, the California Department of Insurance has a whole package of 10 bills that he's putting forth in California this session. There's honestly so much happening in California. It is difficult to keep track of it all. But they have a grant program that's through Cal OES that is in pilot stage to help mitigate clusters of homes in neighborhoods. And Cal Fire is just doing wonderful work in the home mitigation space and the education front as well. That's something we haven't talked a lot about today, but I think it's incredibly important. People don't know what to do. They are sometimes passive out of paralysis because they know there's this wildfire threat. They see that the Los Angeles fires on the news and the like, but they don't have this sense of empowerment that they actually can reduce their risk. And sometimes it doesn't even take that much for them to reduce their risk, particularly in the drought landscape in Arizona. A lot of that drought-friendly landscaping is already consistent with a non-combustible zone 0, right? So they're probably a lot of the way there already. So the more we can do to help educate homeowners and neighborhoods and communities and local jurisdictions that we actually have agreement over the mitigations that matter, that it is a set of actions that if they undertake, they can reduce their risk, that there are programs like Wildfire Prepared that can help walk them through what needs to be done and inspect that it actually has been done, I think we will help people feel empowered that they can take ownership over their wildfire risk, that they can start a FireWise community in their neighborhood and collectively take ownership of that risk and do the actions on all of their homes to reach that wildfire prepared standard. So that's all different good stuff that's happening all over the country. It's an exciting time because I think we've all been a little bit behind. It's felt like we've all, from a policy perspective, from an engagement perspective, certainly not you all who have been fighting these fires for many, many decades, but the rest of us have been struggling to catch up. And now there actually are solutions that we can put into place. And that's an exciting place to be, if a difficult place to be.
Thank you, Michael. It was a very interesting presentation and a lot of discussion. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Should I stay here or go
You can
there
go
for,
back over,
okay.
yeah. So now we're going to move into the council remarks and discussion. Does anybody have any discussion topics to bring forth today, or any remarks on anything that we heard from either of the presentations, or anything else that you might want to talk about?
If I could just make a
Yep.
suggestion. I know there's been a lot of talk about defensible space and enforcement, and I know you mentioned there being a model ordinance for municipalities to adopt. It might be a good idea for maybe a future meeting discussion is to talk about some of the constraints in our state statute in terms of what authorities cities and counties have, with regard to enforcing these policies, just so we have a clear understanding. This council has a clear understanding of what authorities are in existence.
That would be helpful for the report as well, I would imagine. Not making recommendations, but just what's the lay of the land in terms of authorities.
Yeah.
I believe we had a council member online. Karen, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I was going to expand on a couple things from my presentation. I know we have. You want?
Hold on a second.
Great. I'm Karen Collins, representing the American Property Casualty Insurance Association on behalf of Laura, who is not able to join today, though I'm their policy expert on wildfire insurance, and I've been engaged in this discussion, much like Michael, in all of our states across the West. And with some of the other points that we have often noted is that we understand the concerns of the building industry and the cost of new construction, but what we're seeing increasingly is the growing concern of the cost of home ownership over time. And so we are trying to really underscore the point that while there is an initial increase in the cost of new construction, and that is much less significant at new construction than at retrofit, as Michael alluded to, we want to make that point that if we don't choose resilience at new construction, the impact of the loss experience still gets passed on to consumers. And that's what we're seeing with the higher insurance costs, as we're seeing more communities that are lost and are having to go through that reconstruction process. And so the home ownership over time needs to be a significant consideration. So when we talk about these resilience designations that Michael mentioned, wildfire prepared home in our Western wildfire states, the fortified program in our wind-prone states. We as an industry would like to see these resilience designations become so commonly understood and recognized as an Energy Star certification. We know consumers recognize that and the return on investment that those offer. So not just the upfront cost of purchasing that, but what does that return on investment look like from the cost savings that they might spend on their utility bills? And that is where we talk about the long-term home ownership, is that there is a return on investment. What we are seeing from that, obviously with insurance, there is that loss avoidance, and in some states we're seeing premiums offering discounts for resilience designations. That is far more substantial in our wind-prone states, simply because those programs have been in place for a couple of decades now. But in addition to that loss avoidance, what we're seeing, for example, is in Alabama, the state that has the highest number of fortified certifications, over 40,000, those homes sell on average for 7% higher. We are also seeing for communities research that shows that for homes and communities that survive hurricanes, because they can come back and continue to live in them, there are far fewer mortgage delinquencies. And so for the financial services industry, the reduction of mortgage delinquencies is very, very significant. For communities that do not sustain that significant loss from conflagration, you preserve the tax base and the credit bonds for municipal bonds. There are substantial return on investments that are part of the overall cost consideration beyond just that upfront cost of new home construction. So we're trying to broaden some of that awareness and understanding. One other point that I would make is that with trying to address the elephant in the room, the existing housing stock, as was mentioned, it is more challenging. It's going to be a process that has to be done over time, certainly with the insurance process of new policies and certainly renewals that are done typically on an annual basis. That has become one significant touch point for consumers as insurers are seeking out and demanding more risk reduction and mitigation. One of the other things that is underway that is in place now in California is the real estate change of ownership transaction. They have passed a law, and this is currently happening today, that they are requiring with all change of ownership transactions, part of the escrow closing, a defensible space inspection. And so that is another example of just, again, periodic enforcement actions that can be done over time to try to address the existing housing stock. But the biggest opportunities, again, remain at new construction. So those are really where the lowest hanging fruit should be, and where we should make sure that with the need to continue to build more housing, that we're doing it the right way and not expanding the greater issue of the existing housing stock. So I'll pause there.
Thank you. Any other comments, discussion?
If I can just foot stomp what Karen said. I'm often in these conversations around the country, and the challenge with housing affordability, we often think of it as the price of purchase on the point of sale, but housing affordability for most families is about the monthly mortgage payment. And that is a function of four things: principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. And only outside of refinancing, which unfortunately doesn't seem like it's going to happen anytime soon, the only one of those that's variable from year to year is the cost of insurance. So as we think about how can we construct homes that will maintain affordability over time, doing it with these proven construction techniques that we know enhance survivability and insurability are a way that monthly mortgage statement isn't going to jump on somebody unexpectedly year to year in a way that makes what used to be an affordable home no longer affordable.
Anybody else before we move on? All right, with that, we are going to move into the public comment section. I'm just going to go through the logistics. If you have not done so, please fill out the speaking slip or the Google form online. Online comments will be taken after in-person comments. Online attendees will be able to unmute themselves and turn on their camera. When providing comments, please first identify yourself and who you are representing, if applicable. The council will not be answering any questions during the public comment period, but may request that any matters presented be reviewed by council staff or placed on an upcoming agenda. Is there anyone in the room who's completed a slip and would like to come up to the microphone?
I just wanted to let you know, because I am an insurance agent. While you were speaking, well, great. If I can bring that to Williams, I definitely will. I went ahead and emailed 14 different underwriters from various companies that I use and asked if I have clients who have your certification, who have completed the wildfire prepared, will that change the declination that I get from the insurance company? So if anybody's interested in answers, I put my email address on here. I can give answers to. Again, it's a limited section of companies that I have access to, but that's a big question for me. So I just wanted to let you know.
Anyone else in the room? Are there any online comments? If so, Carrie, you'll be taking those.
Okay, it looks like our first speaker is no longer on the call. And Mark Christensen. Mark, you should be able to unmute and contribute now.
Can you hear me now? This is Mark Christian. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me at all? Okay, I guess I'll
Hi,
just
sorry,
use
the
my
problem is on our end. We can hear you.
Okay. I had to step away from the meeting for a few minutes, and I think I've missed some critical portions of some of your discussion. I'm especially interested in any minutes or notes regarding the pending legislation that deals with the cancellation or non-renewal of homeowners insurance. I'm working with my local agent. I'm also with another firm to regain my homeowner policy that has been told it's non-renewable. And for years, we have practiced fire resiliency and mitigation to protect our property in our home. We've trimmed and cut down trees, we've put landscape material, and we're still going to lose our coverage. And so I'm interested in any pending legislation that the rest of that may help homeowners to avoid such a massive decision. Even though we in this area for years have practiced fire mitigation techniques to the local fire district. And if how much you know about this region, I don't know. The National Forest and the Kaibab National Forest, I've worked very diligently and do prescription burning to reduce our wildfire risk. So that's all I care to comment on.
I guess we're adjourned. Thank you.